Here. Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you all for joining another exciting episode of Just Shilling. And we continue to bring you great guests. And that is definitely true for today. And before we get into this, folks, just wanted to let you know that nothing we discuss is going to be considered to be financial advice. Also, the opinions that are shared are of our own and do not necessarily represent our respective organizations. And if it's probably a little bit too spicy for a family dinner or too controversial, we'll leave those topics to the side. But we have a lot to unpack here and such a short amount of time. I don't think that we're going to get to everything, but I'm super excited to welcome everyone to Chris. And Chris, give us that 30-second elevator pitch. Tell us who you are and the company that you work for. And then we're going to go back to the genesis of when your interest in this space first began.
All right. Hey, Trevor. Thanks for having me. Glad we were able to do this.
Yeah.
Super excited to be here and just to share some insights about Civic and identity. I think now is a really interesting time for identity. There is just so many things that we're going to get into that, like you said, I don't think we have time to cover
I don't think
everything,
so.
but identity, not a small topic, but we'll do what we can. So let me first just say a little bit about Civic. We're an identity management and access company. We've been around since about 2015, working on things like what we call the verifiable internet, and we'll get into that. What's the
Yeah.
difference between, being verified, not being verified? Are there gradations of verification? What does it mean, if I'm a bot or if I'm an AI agent, all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
basically, what we do is we provide tools for people to authenticate themselves in a privacy preserving way that enables them to access and do the things they want to do with the technology getting out of the way. And I think that's more important now than ever with the emergence of blockchain, plus digital identities, plus you got AI. All of these confluence of factors, I think, makes it really important that we make simple tools that people can just pick up and use, and they don't have to worry about things like seed phrases and wallets and 82 different kinds of logins. So Civic is really looking to simplify all that. We've got a couple of different products. We work on the Web3 side, we work on the Web2 side with a product called Civic Auth. So I'm really excited to talk about like how I see identity maturing, maybe getting a little bit scary at times, but ways that we can kind of like rope it back in and make it
Yeah.
work on our behalf.
Yeah.
Identity should be something that you feel great about, not something that happens to you, right?
There you go. There you go. And I think that by having conversations like this and keeping the dialogue open, we can collectively, hopefully, move this along in the best fashion possible. So you've been at Civic for several years. You've got a BA in English and philosophy, an MBA in finance, and you've made quite a name for yourself in this space. So can you kind of take us back to the moment that sparked your passion for digital identity in the first place, Chris?
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember this, Trevor, but one of the biggest data breaches that I first became aware of, and I became aware because it happened to me, was 2015. Experian and T-Mobile had
Yeah.
this 15 million record data breach. So I got this notification that said, "Hey, sorry, your PII has been shared, so your personally identifiable information. It was my name, it was my address, it was my payment information." They said, "But don't worry, we got this great solution for you. We're going to pay for credit monitoring for 12 months, and so you can then go sign up with our service, right? So that we can monitor." So then here's the funny thing. I went to go sign up for the service, and you know how you have to go through a flow. They started asking me things like, "Where did you live? What was your street address 15 years ago?" So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, so like this is one of the most sophisticated identity management companies in the world. It's got all of our credit information, all of my underlying data, and it's asking me where I lived 15 years ago. There's got to be a better way. And then fast forward to 2017, it happened again with Equifax,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they lost something like 145 million records all at one time. And so at that time, I met a couple of very incredible entrepreneurs from South Africa, a guy named Vinny Langham and John Smith. No, really, John Smith, that's his name. Speaking of identity management, he's under the radar as John Smith. But those two guys were working on a project called Civic, and they were coming out of South Africa, where there was a very repressive regime for a period of time. People had unequal access to a lot of things, but one of those things was identity. And so they were very passionate about building a company that would sort of level the playing field for everybody to be able to have access to what we think of as kind of an unalienable human right, which is your own identity. And sometimes people have no access, which is a problem we can talk about and needs to get solved. Or sometimes people have access to identity, but they kind of have it ripped away from them if your data is breached or you can't utilize it in a way that gets you access to services. It becomes, I think, less of an asset and more of something that you no longer have. So Civic is really focused on how do we abstract away complexity and make it easy for people to access all the benefits that identity can bring while minimizing the downsides.
Yeah. And what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about their online identity right now? And then we can talk a little bit more to kind of how Civic is shaking things up and really trying to rewrite that narrative per se.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear, at least in the US, and there's differences geographically in the Eurozone. Things are a little bit more tight with regulatory frameworks like GDPR, and California has a version of that. But people seem in the US to kind of be resigned to the fact that my identity's out there. It's been sold. It's on the dark net. It's in all these databases. Ergo, there's nothing I can do about it. Like people know
Mhm.
me, and so now it's devalued, right? So I
Mm,
talk to people about, hey, do you know how much data you're sharing on TikTok or Instagram Reels? Do you know what kind of data access you've enabled apps on your phone to have to your geolocation and even deeper levels of data on your phone? And they kind of throw up their hands and they go, well, identity is a mess. We've already given it up. We don't have privacy, and we've just kind of resigned ourselves to that fact. But it
yeah,
doesn't have to be that way. So that's, to me, that's a misconception. There are ways that we can take back control of our identity. We can do things like selective disclosure, where you only disclose small bits of identity information if and when there's a reason to do so. There are things called zero knowledge proofs. Those are tools that allow you to confirm a fact, like I'm over 21, without having to tell you what my birth date is. And I'm not going to mention it here because it's scary. But
exactly.
like this stuff is important, right?
Yeah,
And people seem to think like that ship has sailed, and I think that's a big kind of mental hurdle that we need to get over, so that people say, you know what, actually, this is important, and even more important now than ever with the emergence of AI and all the different ways that your identity could be misused. We really, we have an obligation, honestly, as a country, and I think worldwide, to take back our identity and to use it in a responsible way. And that starts with giving users tools to be able to do that.
yeah, for sure. Now, another thing, and we talked about this during our original conversation, is that we give away so much personal data a lot without probably even realizing it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the amount that you can deduct from metadata via our online transactions. So, what's one seemingly harmless thing that people do every day that's really actually putting their privacy at risk?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when you're linking accounts together, very often people don't realize what they're doing is they're actually providing access to all the underlying data that account is associated with. So I'll give you an example. When you get to a website and it says log in with Facebook or log in with Google, you're not just making your life easier. Yes, it does. You don't have to set up a user ID and password. But what you're also doing is you're sort of marrying those two accounts together in a way that now those entities, Facebook in this case, let's say, knows that you're logging into a travel site. Okay, why might they want that information that you're logging into Expedia? And they may even find out some of the search that you did when you were on that site. Well, guess what? Like people always talk about this, hey, I was talking about a thing or I was searching
Yeah.
for a thing, and then it started showing up in my feed. I started getting ads. And it seems like there's this ubiquity now. And I think people have a sneaking suspicion in the back of their mind, that some of these voice enabled technologies are picking up on sort of ambient chatter, whether it's in your house with Amazon products or Google Home products or whatever. But like even that linking of accounts, the very simple thing that you do is opening the door to allowing those big tech giants to access that data. And I don't think
Mm,
people think about it much. The other thing that I think about often is, do people really look at the way that their phone is configured and what level of permissions they've
yeah.
given to apps installed on their phone? Okay, all the tooling is there, right? Apple does a great job. Google does a great job to give you the options, but very often these things are not turned off by default. And if you do the thing, and I'm guilty of it too, right? Like you install an app and it says, here are the terms and conditions. We're going to tell you exactly what our privacy policy is. And you kind of go, oh my gosh, this is like 10 pages long and it's this legal minutia. And
Yeah.
you just kind of go, okay, let's go. I just want to get to the thing.
Just want to
Who's
use it. Yeah.
looking out for your privacy in those cases? So I think we need kind of a wholesale reset to say the default state should be privacy preserving. And the default state should be you granting access and having visibility at a granular level to what access you've granted. But it should not be a very permissive, you can do anything with my data as the default state. So I think sometimes that gets missed by people.
Yeah. I can see that for sure. And digital identity, it's something that's generating massive amounts of excitement, but it's also raising a lot of concern. And I think that people kind of get this dystopian views, Q 1984, when you start
Yeah.
to kind of think about this stuff. So how does Civic balance giving people more control over their data while ensuring that that privacy actually stays intact?
Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope, and we need to be very careful. And those concerns are not unwarranted
Yeah,
because I think if and there's a similar concern, Trevor, around things like stable coins, right? If there's a government issued stable coin and every single dollar equivalent that you're spending anywhere you go all around the country, can be tracked at an absolutely precise level, that's incredibly invasive. I personally think it's sort of anti-American, and we have a right to privacy. And on the identity front, I think it's very similar. So, with the emergence of digital IDs, we see now mobile driver's licenses in 30 states all around the country. We see services with government logins where you need to be able to utilize a digital identity. And the key here is you want to be able to have a verified source on the back end. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about AI in a
yeah,
minute. There is a really important reason why you want to be able to track back to an authoritative party who is going to verify your identity. So I live in California, the California DMV. They have a pretty good idea who I am and who everybody in California is. Because why? You had to show up at the DMV, you had to show them a utility bill. They took a picture of you. You stood in that awful line. You
yeah.
showed up in person, right? Like you're embodied, but like they know who you are. Now, that mobile driver's license is a pretty good indicator that I am who I say I am. But, and here's the big but, should the DMV and should the state of California therefore have access to know everything that I do downstream using that ID? And I think this is where the big tension is, because the card in my wallet, I can take that card out and I can show that at a gate of entry, for whatever, a casino, a bar,
Yeah.
anything where that's age gated. And people don't necessarily want or need, or there's no reason to be collecting that information. We need to get to a similar level of privacy with digital identity where we can abstract away the verification from the underlying data. And this is one of the things that got me really excited about Civic was blockchain technology was just emerging at that time. It was just Bitcoin back in the day when I joined, but now obviously we have a proliferation of L1 and L2 blockchains that are cheap, fast, efficient, and we have a way to take that underlying authoritative, what I call authoritative or really good verification of something like the California DMV, and say, we're going to tell you that this person is who they say they are, but we're not actually going to give you the data behind it. You don't need to know Chris's address. You don't need to know his birthday. You don't need a picture of him. We're going to give you the absolute bare minimum. And so being able to take the authoritative source, but only reveal the appropriate information, that's where I think tools like Civic can be very helpful.
I think so. I think so for sure. Now, when it comes to privacy and convenience, how does Civic manage to really kind of continue to offer the best of both worlds and give users this seamless experience without really kind of compromising the security?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, this is something that is incredibly important. And I think sometimes people gloss over. If you're going to handle any kind of secure or private data PII in the industry or personally identifiable information, and there's variations of that kind of information depending on if you're in the medical field, it's governed by something called HIPAA. If you're in the eurozone, there's regulations around that. Here in California, we have a very specific set of regulatory requirements around handling PII. And the way Civic handles that, much like many other identity companies, is it's got to be encrypted. The way Civic is a little bit different. Maybe is we take that notion of a private key, just like in the blockchain world, you secure your wallet with a public. It's a public and private key pair, right? You have your public wallet, and then you have your private key. We take that private key and we use it to encrypt the user's data end to end. So
Fantastic.
even Civic doesn't have access to that data. So that's the user's data. They're going to be, revealing bits and pieces of that information as they need to, but otherwise it should not be sort of a data harvest free for all. And being able to make it convenient to the second part of your question means pairing it with uses that people are already really familiar with. So I was talking about login with Facebook or login with Google a little while ago. Those are still great tools, provided they're abstracted behind a layer that doesn't allow them to then have free reign over your data. So we do something at Civic with a product called Civic Auth, where you can still log in with Google, and we create a wallet on the back end, an abstracted wallet. The user doesn't even know the wallet's there. It's called an embedded wallet or a wallet abstraction. And then they use that private key, they don't even know it, to secure their data. And that's the encryption key for the data. So using the blockchain technology, there's a reason why this was hard before and is possible now, and a digital identity and things like login, single sign-on tooling. Pairing all those things together creates a lot of power for privacy and for the individual to protect their data. We think of it as an orchestration layer because it's in between all these other systems that are sort of trying to monetize your data or give you
Yeah,
access to things. So
yeah.
that's kind of the role we play.
And we live in an age where companies are collecting data more than ever. It's insane the amount of data that is being collected. So, what's the best way to kind of ensure that only the absolute necessary amount of data is collected, and everything else is kind of kept out of the picture?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with what access you as an individual are giving various companies, and unfortunately, we're sort of stuck in this place where if you want to access tools that are relevant today, and I would include, you know, whatever Facebook, TikTok, X, even LinkedIn, you're required to give up a certain amount of personally identifiable information. And I don't want to say that's always a bad thing. Even in the context of opening a bank account, there are laws that require financial institutions to take certain amounts of data and to hold that data. Why did they do that? Well, for money laundering purposes, they want to make sure you're not on some kind of a federal do not serve
Watch list,
list, right? Politically exposed people. There's all these different things. So the important thing is, to your point, what is the minimum absolutely required data? And when does that line get stepped over? It gets stepped on and stepped over all the time. I think, unfortunately, we're now in a culture where companies are rewarded for harvesting data and monetizing that data. And very often, you as a user have no idea that your data is being sold out the back door to a data broker who's then taking your information and starting to correlate it with all kinds of different things. I mean, it's incredible. Like Trevor, I don't know if people really realize, but they can take device IDs from your phone. Apps can read a device ID on your phone. And then if there's somebody you hang out with a lot and they have the same app, they can start to correlate, hey, these two people are often in the same geolocation.
wow,
They
yeah,
must be friends. Like,
yeah.
that stuff is happening. And I don't think people really understand that. So I think, to answer your question directly, it's going to take a combination of regulatory oversight and clarity to force companies to disclose, and not necessarily block, but disclose what data they're collecting. And the opt in should be, I think, a little bit more robust than scroll to the bottom of the terms and hit accept. Like, there are AI tools now, actually, that ironically, that are doing a good job of taking those privacy policies, taking those terms and conditions, and saying, actually, here's what this means for you. Like, you're
Yeah,
allowing
yeah.
this. So AI is sort of the threat to identity, but it's also like the remedy in some ways. That's why it's a little bit
It's
complicated.
Yeah, it can be a double-edged sword for sure. Now, this brings it to the next question, and we're hearing obviously a lot about AI and digital identity coming together. There's AI agents, and obviously with everything that was going on, like was that last weekend with DeepSeek. I mean, there's so much moving going on. So, really, kind of, what do you think will be the biggest surprise for people when these two worlds truly do merge together?
I think I'm excited actually. I think it's going to turn out in the long run to be a really good thing. People will be surprised how much they end up using AI and don't even think about it and don't even necessarily know it. It's going to become so finely ingrained in your daily experience in the same way that email became
Yeah,
ingrained.
text
Video,
messaging.
yeah, text messaging, video conferencing. At first, it feels shocking, but then even 6 months from now, are you going to want to give up that little button that says summarize this email and like tell me what I need to know? Like, for real, TLDR, for real. Like, AI
Yeah,
can help with that. So I think it can be an incredible help and boon to humanity. I think actually it's going to increase productivity. It's going to give us a lot more throughput as individuals. We're going to be able to focus on the things that matter and allow agents to help us with these other sort of busy work tasks that may or may not add a ton of value to your daily life. Now, it's a double-edged sword though, because in order to get to that place that I described, we need to have the right guardrails in place. And there's a concept that I like to think about, which is, if you know what a power of attorney is, it's when you basically tell somebody they can operate on your behalf.
yes, yes. Yeah,
And we're going to need to have power of attorney like privileges granted to AI agents so that they can do things for us. And we need to be able to tune those permissions depending on what that specific agent is capable of and what we intend for them to do. So, for example, if you wanted an AI agent to book a ticket on American Airlines from Boston to San Francisco, what information would they need to be enabled with? And for what period of time? Would it be a permanent granting of your American Airlines login, your AA frequent flyer number,
yeah,
your credit card, your TSA pre-check, et cetera, right? Like, so you start to think about all these like little pieces of information, and you want somebody to go book this ticket for you. It's kind of like if you hired a travel agent, they're going to need the same things, but you don't want that to be forever. And you really want to understand that it will turn off at a prescribed period of time, or at least you have visibility and you know, okay, this is my travel agent, ironically, right? But I think we all will have travel agents, which will be AI agents. And I'm going to give them access to all this information. And then you need a very clean record to be able to see what did they do? When did they do it? What was the cost? What was the login? Like all of this tracking. And probably we're going to end up with an agent that's just doing that, tracking your other agents, right?
Agents for agents for agents.
It's going to be turtles all the way down, man. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it kind of feels like we're opening Pandora's box here. And these AI agents, I mean, they're popping up everywhere on the blockchain. They're doing everything from creating meme coins to performing other various tasks. And it does sound wild now, but how do we really kind of make sure that these AI agents don't go rogue and cause chaos? Or is that something that we truly can't control now? Or we're just really trying to build a plane as we fly, if you will?
No, I think we can control it. It's not a question of how. I think it's a more question of will.
Okay.
Willpower to be able to do it and require it. So, look, I mean, the U.S. has been a laggard in terms of creating and enforcing a clear regulatory framework for crypto and blockchain. I think everybody can acknowledge that clarity would be helpful for innovation, but absent that clarity, and this is not just the US, this is globally, what we've seen is people taking advantage of that lack of clarity to basically, I think, fleece retail. Retail ends up getting the short end of the stick the majority of the time because
Yeah.
you've got agents, we call them agents now, but these kinds of algorithmic trading bots, which are really the precursors to agents, have been out there for a long time. The difference is, the big market makers and hedge funds have had access and Joe Public has not. Okay. So now fast forward to 2025, there are open DeFi protocols that allow agents to go out and sort of run wild and front run retail while simultaneously pumping on social media the very same agent, right? They can create it all. They can create the
Yeah.
extreme, they can create the FOMO, they can create the token itself, the meme coin, they can list it, and then they can front run and they can do a Sybil attack and all of these different things. It's like the perfect recipe for really, I think, retail getting hurt. And there's going to be stories, you can be sure, in the next couple of years where people lose everything. And I don't want to see it get to that point. I think we have the right laws on the books around financial transactions and what constitutes identity requirements. And AI agents need to be identified in the same way that you would as a trader. You don't get to just show up, at Morgan Stanley and say, you don't need to know who I am. I'm going to buy $1 million of Tesla, or I'm going to buy a short. You don't get to do that. So, like, why should an agent get to do that in our financial systems? And I think crypto is an adjunct to our financial system at this point.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit more? I know that we brought this up during our initial conversation, but the concept of like this proof of personhood, right? And also kind of negating things like this fake engagement coming up, and then maybe even share a little bit more about what a Sybil attack is, because there may be folks in the audience that aren't even aware of what that is and the complexities of something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, proof of personhood, I think, can be summarized as one human individual and correlated to one online or on chain identity. And
Mm,
you notice I say identity, but I didn't say revealing all of your underlying information. There are gradations of identity, and I think that's a good thing. Sometimes you want to be anonymous. You may be anonymous on a social media platform. The social media platform may know who you are, but you can represent yourself however you want on X. You can be a
yeah.
degen all day long, and that's fine, and do all the kind of posting that we see all the time. Or sometimes you want to be pseudo anonymous. There's a lot of developers who are out there who don't want to be doxxed. They don't want to be revealed their underlying identity, but they want to talk about their space. And then sometimes I think people do want to be fully revealed and honest and authentic about who they are, depending on what that use case is. Okay, so when we talk about one person, one identity, biometrics plays a big role in that. I think being able to verify somebody is getting harder as AI gets better and better, especially some of the traditional methods around take a picture of your face. We at Civic have had to evolve our technology so that we're not just doing a static 2D image, we're doing a 3D face map that has depth, that has you moving your head so that you can see. I think people are going to be familiar with this kind of technology, and that's really important. And then being able to use that same face map to authenticate down the road, I think is important because we'll come to civil attacks, which is where when one person pretends to be many and they try and
Mm,
defraud a system. So you could imagine an AI agent or even just a hacker. They want to create a lot of FOMO around a stock, a meme coin, an NFT, whatever it is, even the Trump coin or whatever.
yeah.
If they put a lot of buy pressure onto that small liquidity float asset, they can move markets. And when you can move markets in a predictable way, you can either long or you can short those markets and you can make money based on movements as a sophisticated trader. So civil attack is nothing more than creating the appearance of a consensus movement. And that's often done in the blockchain world with one person or bot owning multiple wallets. And it looks like individual unique price action and movements on an asset. Or in the case of, like we talk about voter fraud in the Web 2
Yeah.
world, it's, are you really one person taking an unfair advantage of the system and voting multiple times? So being able to tie biometrics to it, I think, is part of the answer. Being able to go back to a verifiable system of record like the California DMV or the TSA database, or in Europe, your country of record, I think that's part of the answer. But it's going to be a cobbled together sort of patchwork of different signals, including online and on chain behavior, including financial assets and resources. What bank are you associated with? These various identity signals ultimately roll up into something that I think replaces what's known in the US as the FICO score, right? So the FICO score is a reflection of, like, what do you own? Did you pay your bills on time? Like, where have you worked? What's your online, purchase behavior? All these different things roll up into something that's like a trust score. And I think we're going to end up with a new version of that for the right century that we're in. I
Yeah.
think those guys
Do you
have
think it
kind of,
would be something that's kind of like a social credit score or something like that even?
yeah, there should be an element of who's vouching for you as part of that credit score. So think of that as sort of a network of webs, just like in the Google sort of ad crawler or web crawler world.
Yeah.
The number of backlinks you have from credible institutions to your website. So if I have a medical website and I've got Johns Hopkins and Stanford and all these different very reputable known entities linking to me, that raises my credibility. So we're
Yeah.
going to end up with, I think, a credit score element or a social score element that'll be part of that overall trustworthiness as well.
Yeah. I mean, the whole social construct is evolving at the speed of light. It's quite fascinating. And with Web3 regulations constantly shifting, how does Civic really kind of stay on top of all of this, all of these changing, and how are you able to kind of maintain that compliance while still staying true to the core values of decentralization and privacy and what's really important for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is there are laws that are on the books today that, and I'm a former controller for a big public company and then a CFO for many years, and I know what the requirements are that companies need to comply with,
Yeah.
and they're not that different. Yes, it's a new paradigm. They need to be executed in a slightly different way, given the nature of crypto and blockchain and some of the challenges around anonymity, and wallets. Like those things need to be addressed. But the reality is, there's a lot of laws on the books that already exist that I think are going to start to be brought to bear on the crypto industry in a much more serious way. Which, for example, if you're going to transfer assets over a certain value within a very specific time period, then there's a certain amount of disclosure. And typically, the one who has to deal with that disclosure is the platform that's facilitating that transfer. So, if you
Yeah.
recall, I don't know if you remember the tornado cash thing, where basically the big question was, here are these developers who created this mixer where you put Bitcoin in on this end, and then it goes through this mixer and it sort of gets washed around, and then on the other end you get some other crypto token out. That's sort of running afoul of a lot of different rules. It's hard to think of like a lot of great reasons why like you would
Yeah.
need exactly that thing. But on the other hand, like a Uniswap where you're transferring token A for token B, they have an obligation actually to know who you are at some level, the appropriate level. If it looks like you're doing something nefarious, like money
Yeah.
laundering for North Korea, like they need to take action. And there are reasons for some of these laws. So I think a lot of the things already exist. It's just we haven't had the will in the US and the clarity to be able to put in place the systems to comply up till
And
now.
I think things are changing, hopefully for the better. And there are a lot of different digital identity solutions out there. Some that I can kind of think of. There's like the world coin, the world coins of the world out there. There's other things that are going on with the initiatives with like the World Economic Forum and like their digital ID and Agenda 2030, et cetera. Right, but what sets Civic self-sovereign approach apart, and why does decentralization matter to not only you but your organization in the long run, and why should it matter
Yeah.
to everyone else?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. There's no shortage of digital identity firms out there, and I think what sets Civic apart is we recognize that there is going to be no one size fits all solution to
Mm,
solve worldwide global identity.
yeah.
It's just not going to happen. But what there can be is an orchestration layer that brings together everything that you have as an element of your identity into a framework where you own it and you know where it's being used. You know that the disclosures that you're making are the absolute minimum that you need for that specific use case. You can withdraw your permission for that data at any time. Again, that's in accordance with regulation. You've got to be able to do that. And it's a combination really of self-sovereign sometimes, but also
Yes.
we have to recognize there has to be an authority somewhere vouching. Yes, could it be some social vouching? Could it be some self-attested things like I'm going to tell you where I went to university? Sure, you can go look it up if you want, but you probably have to call the school. And do we really care that much about that one specific fact? Well, if you're a company hiring somebody, maybe, but otherwise probably not. So it's going to be actually, I think, an aggregation of these signals coming together and trying to create an environment where people can disclose, with eyes wide open rather than being surprised that your data is out there and you're being targeted. Now, one of the biggest users of all this data is marketing firms, right? I mean, they've got some of the biggest ad dollars, those spends are
Yeah.
driving a lot of the economy. And we think there should be an opportunity for individuals to participate in a way that rewards them, as well. That's part of your data. You're revealing things about yourself. Right now, who's making money on that? Meta, Google, Apple, TikTok, and the list goes on and on. There's a lot of people making money on your data. Right now, you're not making anything. We think that's a paradigm that will shift, should shift, and we want to be part of that as well.
Yes, yes. And, self-sovereign identity, it's not just about finance, even though that can be a misconception. So, how do you kind of envision it transforming industries like healthcare and education? And what does that future look like? I know that you alluded to that a little bit earlier, but can you give a little bit more depth to that?
Yeah. So when you go into a doctor's office and you haven't been there before, and they hand you that clipboard,
Oh,
and it's got like a page or two, all this information you have to put down.
yeah,
You know what I always do at this point? Like I didn't used to do that. I kind of like figured it out later on. I just put my name and then I just cross everything out and I just hand it back to them. And they're like, well, you got to like fill out the thing. I'm like, no, I don't. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm like, why do you need? Explain to me why you need this information. And by the way, you
yeah,
probably already have it right through another channel. So I think we're going to change the nature of the way consumers interact with the healthcare system, with vendors and suppliers of things like credit cards, loans, for mortgages, for cars, for all of these different touch points of the healthcare financial ecosystem, even education. There's going to be a new paradigm where, and we want to be at the vanguard of this, where consumers can actually pick and choose different, I think, framework that we're all going to embrace, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there because there's a lot of money at stake in these retargeting and marketing kinds of firms.
yeah. Now, I don't if you're probably living under a rock, people may be a little bit unfamiliar with what governments are doing, and they're starting to obviously, kind of take control of digital identity systems in their own right. So, how can these decentralized solutions like Civic maintain the individual's freedom while keeping things secure?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it comes down to once you've authenticated yourself and you have somebody vouching for you, whether it's the federal government or your state government or your school or whatever, whoever the authoritative party is, that data should be encrypted, at rest and in transit, and then only shared if I, as a user, say, yes, I'm comfortable sharing this information. And it shouldn't just be assumed that the user has granted access, and it should be revocable. So the difference with now where we are and digital identity emerging is I think we have to be more vigilant than ever because the temptation for various vendors to just say, we're just going to take everything we can. And I hear that a lot from companies. We are, they say our job is to just get the maximum data and we're going to figure out how to monetize it later. And so they
Yeah,
build these huge lakes of, very personal, very private, and meaningful data that then are they protecting them correctly based on the number of data breaches I see every single year? They're not. And attackers know that there's real value in harvesting this data and selling it on the dark web. So I think with digital identity and governments starting to create this great lake of data, we need to be even more vigilant and make sure A, they're securing the data correctly. B, when that data comes out from behind those walls, it's being encrypted and only released by the user's direct consent. And then C, I think we need to look again at what are we revealing and why are we doing that? Just like the doctor's office, like we need to be crossing out a lot of this, like, you don't need this, you don't need this, or you need to explain why you need it. And I don't want people to feel helpless. We need to boil it down to the point where it's low friction and easy to protect your identity. Should you really have to go out and hire LifeLock to protect you and be hyper vigilant on your credit scores and all these things? That's a failure in my mind in the identity ecosystem. If that's the only way you can get to a certain level of security.
yeah. And adding it to that, in the age of scams and we have all these other kind of threats online. this kind of trust in this digital identity, I think, is something that's really, crucial. But as we're getting to that, right, it's also very challenging. So, kind of how is the work that your team is doing continuously making people feel safe about their personal information being shared online, and you know, really, can you help us define where that line is between that transparency and privacy?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, one of the things we do at Civic is we make sure that people can see what exactly has been shared. So, for example, you might have something we call a liveness pass. A liveness pass is like when you do the video selfie to show,
Hmm.
you move your head to show you're a real person. You might
Yes.
have a uniqueness pass. A uniqueness is that 3D face map I mentioned, the biometrics. You might have an identity document verification, passport, driver's license, ID card, or whatever. All of those things that you've done, all of the touch points with our system, you have visibility to all of those, and you know exactly what private key is securing those. And if or when those things are shared, it's only with your direct consent. But you're right, that privacy or that sense of security only comes with transparency. Now, for you as the individual, my view is you should have 100% transparency on everything you've shared, who you've shared it with, and what downstream was that used for, so that I did this proactively on my own behalf because I wanted to buy a car and they needed this information. They needed to know my salary, they needed to know my credit history, etc. And then you need to know what was done with it on the back end. Was it sold to a data broker who's then going to use all of that to retarget? Well, yes, generally it is today. So I think we need to improve transparency downstream so that people start to rebuild confidence in the institutions that they're interacting with. And
Mm,
that's like a real sea change in the US. It's more common outside the US, especially Europe, to have much tighter controls. And again, we go back to that, like, people just don't care. They want the free thing, they want the easy thing.
they want to use it now.
Yeah, I actually think that undersells the way that people think about their identity. If we can give them the right tools that make it easy for them to protect themselves, who wouldn't do that?
Mm, mm. And things, and I know you were talking about this before, but biometrics, facial recognition, fingerprinting. I mean, these things are kind of becoming the norm now. A lot more than just the basic kind of captcha. Where do
Yeah.
you really kind of see this going in the future of identity verification?
Yeah, I think biometrics are going to be an important part of identity verification going forward. And if you think about, like, the most authoritative, source of identity, like we talked about the California DMV, let's say they upped their technology game a little bit, so they weren't taking a 2D photo so that they could put it onto your driver's license, your physical card, but instead they were doing a 3D face map when you got into the DMV. And then that 3D face map, which by the way can be privacy preserving, doesn't mean it's a picture of your face. Especially within the context of Civic, that's not how we do it. It's more like a mathematical equation that equates to your face. That
Yes.
that then can be compared next time you want to go do something. So I think biometrics become just like when you open up your iPhone and you're like, do you want to type the code or do you want to turn on the face, unlock? Oh, okay, well, let me turn on the face unlock. It just becomes easy. I think we can have security and still make things easy. And we just need to close that loop and connect these links between the authoritative parties who are really in the know about identity and those downstream use cases. I mean, that's exactly what we're working on doing at Civic. That's why we're integrating all of the digital IDs. In the Eurozone, there's a regulatory thing called EIDAS, but everybody's going digital. In India, it's like 1 point something billion people already have a digital ID under Aadhaar, which, by the way, got breached, the Aadhaar database.
Uh,
But
Yeah, I mean, people are just so much more comfortable with it too, in many Asian countries as well too. I mean, I think that we have a bit of catching up to do here in the States, and really kind of excited to see where that evolves. And bring it to the next question as well here to really kind of like looking ahead. What do you really think that this digital identity space looks like in the short term, long term, right? 3 or 5 years out?
yeah. So I think in the short term, it's still about building the right tool set and connecting together all of the different systems that need to be connected. So yeah, I'll give
Mm,
you a couple examples. In the Web3 world, what we find is users tend to be global. It's very common for like a decentralized finance project or a trading project or an NFT project to pull users from sub-Saharan Africa and South America and the Asia Pacific region and the US. So there's a global user base that are coming to some of these tools, just like social media platforms. There's a global user base. And so there needs to be a global solution. And those things need to be connected back to these systems of record in a way that makes it really easy and doesn't impede the user experience. So I think there's going to be a build cycle that we're part of for the next call it 12 to 24 months to just start to hook up these systems together as they come online. In anger, we're having real mobile driver's licenses roll out. We just had New York State roll it out. We're up to 30. That means we're missing 20. Like, what are those guys doing? Okay. So like we still need to build the tooling and connect it together. And that's going to take a lot of work. Fast forward 5 years from now, my hope would be everything is as simple as looking at your phone to unlock it and re-verifying. It's not I got a text and then I have to type the code in, or I got an email and now I'm typing a code in, or a captcha, as you said. Like those are bridge solutions on the way to a much more robust and secure digital identity infrastructure. Blockchain has a role to play for sure. Blockchains are uniquely suited to digital identity because of the immutable nature of the blockchain. You can be sure of facts.
yeah,
Identity is a fact. Now, what you can't do is put personally identifiable information on a blockchain because blockchains are forever. So I'm not going to
yeah,
put your name, Trevor, on a blockchain because we can never take it off. But I could say, you're is this person who owns this private key part of the crypto recruiters? Yes. Okay. That's a thumbs up or thumbs down proposition. So being able to use those types of on-chain attestations in combination with your off-chain identity on your mobile device or wherever you are, that's the future. Make it easy, make it safe, make it secure.
yes, yes. And, a lot of people, it's interesting. Over the past few years, we've kind of stopped talking about the metaverse, but it's not going away. So when it comes to the future of digital identity, everything that we've discussed is incredibly exciting. But, what's kind of one of the key factors that could really kind of truly unlock its full potential and completely transform the way that we interact with the digital world, and maybe even this combination of the physical worlds and the metaverse and things of that nature that are going to obviously come into play in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be driven by AI and AI in a variety of different formats. We talked a little bit about agents, but we also need to have that flip side of the coin, which is proof of humanity. And I think we touched
Yeah.
on biometrics and on chain attestations and zero knowledge proofs to be able to release certain amount of information. Being able to empower AI agents out in the real world to do things on your behalf, I think the adoption curve is just going to be incredibly steep. We're at the bottom of that curve, and it's going to ramp up really, really quickly. I agree with you. The metaverse piece is not going to go away, but it's also not moving as quickly, I think, maybe as people thought or
Why do
hoped.
you think that? Why do you think that it's moving at a slower pace than anticipated?
Yeah, I don't think we've really mastered the technology in a way that is really uniformly good across
Mm,
a wide variety of experiences. I think it's good for very specific use cases, like the Apple glasses, um, which I think were great by all reports, for things like sitting down and watching a movie in the screen. But there was so much compute power required by these glasses. They actually weren't rendering things that were just like out of your eyesight. So they're basically
Mm,
rendering things that you're looking directly at, but things that are sort of off to the side. Like they didn't have enough compute power,
in
and
the
the thing was
peripheral.
still, yeah, it was still really heavy,
Yeah.
and the UI UX wasn't great. And as much as Mark Zuckerberg says, "Hey, my thing was better," and like I'm going to put up a video of like myself chatting with this other person, people still have this like frame rate seasickness kind of effect. So I think the tech is just not quite there. There's a disjointedness to it that doesn't lend itself to wide adoption. And I think prices would also have to come way down. I think it's way more likely it's going to be an overlay type situation, more like Google Glass back from the early days,
Yeah.
where basically you have an AR type experience, augmented reality. So you're out there in the real world, but you have AI, telling me, oh yeah, this is Trevor. You know him because I accessed your notes and I looked at this really sweet Google Live event that you guys did together, and I'm going to remind you some facts
Yeah.
about it. I'm going to chirp it in your ear. Like, I think that's the more likely path to adoption. But again, like I think AI is going to play a really big part in that. And who do you want chirping in your ear, by the way? An agent that that has a specific task that you control that nobody else can get a hold of, right?
Yeah.
Imagine how bad that would be if
Yeah.
any AI agent can talk right directly to you.
Ugh. And as you mentioned, Chris, there's so much to talk about. We haven't talked about actual, AGI and then, quantum computing. I mean, that can throw a whole nother wrench in this conundrum that we have on our hands here. But we are living in very, very exciting times. So time is almost up. I would love to, you know, have you share with the audience and the people that tune in for the recording that we put up on YouTube in the future. Talk to us a little bit about, some exciting partnerships that you're involved in, the roadmap. Are you currently hiring? How can
Mhm.
people volunteer or contribute or just learn more about the awesome thing that you are doing?
Yeah. So thank you. We are actually hiring. We're looking for developers, and it's funny because this ties back to identity too, right? Like, how do you know who you're hiring, and how
Yeah.
do you know who you're working for in a remote first world? There's too many stories of people who've got like 8 jobs, and they have all their computers arrayed around them, and they're pulling down 750K a year or whatever. But anyway, yeah, we are hiring for developers. Would love to get inbound interest if people are interested in working with Civic and what we're doing here. If you want to check out what we're up to, I would advise people to come to civic.com, and you'll think about, or I would suggest there's sort of like two different main areas that we're working on. One is called Civic Pass, which is really focused on that on-chain
Yeah.
attestation. We've built our solution across now 12 blockchains, all the EVM blockchains, all this, the Solana, including the SVM. So there's L2s on top of Solana,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Awesome.
Which is interesting. So like the Civic Pass is all about that on-chain attestations. We've got a bunch of customers using that, including Gitcoin, gaming platforms, civil attack prevention, proof of age, proof of geography. Okay, like we want to have people from certain place, but not another place. And then Civic Auth is something we're really excited about. We announced it in November. It's launching at the end of this quarter in beta, and Civic Auth brings together single sign-on. We're going to be adding in pass keys, digital identity that we just talked about from all these various sources, and then bringing that all on chain this year. So that's what we're excited about. We're trying to give tools to real people and fake people known as agents so that they can do the things that they need to do without getting scammed.
Wow, Chris, we did it. We
Woo!
we unpacked a heck of a lot in an hour. Oh my goodness. Now after this, it's just going to send me down a million other rabbit holes, but that's what I love. I love to continue learning and really, really appreciate the incredible insight that you shared with us today, and grateful for everyone that took the time to tune in today on this Friday. You could have been doing anything else in the world, but you joined us for this incredible conversation, and look forward to having future great chats just like this one today. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be getting this up on the socials, and look out for that live episode up on YouTube if you weren't able to join today. Thank you again, Chris. Thank you for your time. And everyone else out there, have a great day. Take care and have a good weekend.
Thanks, Trevor.